I remember the exact weight of the air that night. It pressed against my skin like something alive, thick with a kind of humidity that makes you believe the world is holding its breath right along with you. The kind of night where decisions feel inevitable, where consequences seem like abstract concepts that happen to other people in other lives, on other ordinary evenings that couldn't possibly intersect with your own. His name was Marcus, and he loved me with the sort of devotion that should have felt like shelter but instead felt like a cage I had outgrown without permission. For years together, two of them married, and I had become an expert at cataloging his kindnesses while resenting them simultaneously. The way he would warm my towel in the dryer while I showered, the careful notes he left on the bathroom mirror in dry erase marker. "You are beautiful when you sleep. I hope your presentation goes well. Don't forget we have dinner with my mom at 7. The notes accumulated like evidence of a crime I hadn't yet committed, but was already planning in the secret theater of my discontent. That particular Tuesday started like any other. Marcus left for work at 7:15, his lips brushing my forehead with the practiced gentleness of routine. I kept my eyes closed, feigning sleep, unwilling to participate in the small ritual of goodbye. Through my lashes, I watched him pause at the bedroom door, his silhouette framed by the pale morning light, and I felt nothing but irritation at his hesitation. Just go, I thought. Just leave me alone with my unhappiness. It's remarkable, isn't it, how we construct narratives to justify our worst impulses. I had spent months building a case against Marcus, collecting evidence of his inadequacies like a prosecutor preparing for trial. He was too predictable, too safe, too satisfied with our small life in our small apartment, with our small future spreading out before us like an endless series of identical days. He didn't challenge me. He didn't understand me. He loved me too much, and somehow, in the twisted arithmetic of my discontent, that had become his greatest offense. I met Daniel at a coffee shop 3 blocks from our apartment. He was a freelance photographer or a graphic designer, or something creative and vaguely impressive that I can no longer remember with any clarity. What I remember is the way he looked at me, like I was someone worth discovering, like my ordinary observations about the weather or the quality of the espresso held hidden depths he alone could appreciate. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He laughed at my jokes. He touched my hand when he made a point. Brief electric connections that left my skin tingling long after his fingers had moved away. We started meeting for coffee regularly, then for drinks after work, then for long lunches that stretched into afternoons. I told myself it was innocent. I told myself I deserved friends, deserved connection, deserved someone who saw me as something more than a wife. Marcus never questioned my explanations. Late meetings at work, drinks with colleagues, a new friend from the coffee shop, just someone to talk to. He trusted me with the complete, unquestioning trust of someone who has never considered betrayal as a possibility. Looking back, that was the cruelest part. Not the betrayal itself, but the ease with which I exploited his trust. I would come home with Daniel's scent still clinging to my clothes, with the ghost of his lips hovering somewhere near my own, and Marcus would ask about my day with genuine interest. He would have made dinner, something simple but careful because he knew I'd had a long day. He would have opened the wine I liked, the expensive one we couldn't really afford but that he bought anyway, because he loved watching my face when I tasted it, and I would sit across from him at our small kitchen table. This man who had never given me any reason to doubt his love, and I would lie, not with words, always, but with omissions, with the careful management of eye contact, with the way I would suddenly become very interested in my food. When he asked about the details of my day, I told myself I was protecting him. I told myself I was figuring things out, that I would know what to do when the time came, that somehow everything would work out without anyone getting hurt. The night it happened, the night that would become the fixed point around which all other nights would orbit, began with a lie. I told Marcus I was working late on a project with a tight deadline. I told him not to wait up, that I would grab something to eat in the city, that he should go ahead and have dinner without me. He kissed my cheek and told me to be careful, to text him when I got home that he loved me. I remember watching him from the doorway as he settled onto the couch with a book, and the remnants of his solitary dinner. The television murmured quietly in the background, some documentary about ocean life that he'd been wanting to watch watch for weeks. He looked so small from that distance, so contained within the boundaries of his simple contentment, and I felt a surge of something that might have been pity or contempt, or the first stirrings of the guilt that would eventually consume me entirely. Daniel's apartment was on the other side of town, in a neighborhood of converted warehouses and exposed brick, and the kind of carefully curated imperfection that signals real money. He had a rooftop terrace with a view of the city skyline, and he had texted me earlier that afternoon with a photograph of the sunset and the words, "You should see this in person." I took a cab because I wanted the extra time to compose myself, to shift from the person I was at home to the person I became when I was with him. The city slid past the window in smears of light and shadow, and I thought about nothing at all. That's the truth. I sat in the back of that cab and I emptied my mind of everything, except the anticipation of what was to come. The electric thrill of crossing a line I had been approaching for weeks. Daniel met me at the door with a glass of wine and a smile that suggested he already knew exactly how the night would end. His apartment was all clean lines and expensive shadows, the kind of space designed to impress rather than comfort. Art I didn't understand hung on the walls. Books I would never read sat arranged on floating shelves. The whole place felt like a performance, and I was happy to be an audience. We talked for hours, or maybe it was only minutes. Time becomes unreliable in those liminal spaces between decision and action. He asked about my work, my childhood, my dreams. He told me about his travels, his ex-girlfriends, his theories about love and art, and the fundamental loneliness of human existence. It was all very sophisticated, very grown-up, very different from the simple conversations I had with Marcus about grocery lists and weekend plans and whether we should finally replace the couch. When he kissed me, it was not the sudden ambush I would later describe to myself in my more forgiving moments. It was a slow, deliberate convergence, a mutual decision made without words. His lips were soft and tasted of wine and something else, something unfamiliar that I would come to associate forever with the particular flavor of ruin. I kissed him back, and in that moment, I didn't just cheat on Marcus. I didn't just break a vow or cross a line or make a mistake. I killed something that had been alive and breathing and real, something that had loved me with its whole heart and asked for nothing in return, except the simple courtesy of my fidelity. The night unfolded in fragments I have never been able to assemble into a coherent whole. The way his hands moved across my body with the confidence of someone who has done this before. The city lights bleeding through the windows, the unfamiliar sheets against my skin, the moment of stillness afterward when I lay in a stranger's bed and felt the first cold fingers of realization begin to close around my throat. I left before dawn. Daniel slept through my departure, his arm thrown across the empty space where I had been, his face slack and peaceful in the pale light. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I simply gathered my clothes and my guilt and my shaking hands, and I walked out into the empty city. The cab ride home was the longest journey of my life. Every block we passed felt like an accusation. Every red light was a moment of judgment. I watched the buildings slide by and I tried to calculate. How many people were waking up in apartments just like mine? How many of them were carrying secrets like the one I now held? How many of them had done what I had done and somehow survived? Our apartment was dark when I let myself in. The clock on the microwave read for -40-7. Marcus had left a light on in the kitchen, a small kindness that felt like a wound. There was a note on the counter next to the coffee maker. Went to bed early. There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you're hungry. Love you. I stood in that kitchen for a long time, holding that note, trying to remember how to breathe. The paper was warm from the lamp beneath it. His handwriting was careful and legible, the handwriting of someone who wants to be understood. I thought about him making dinner alone, eating alone, falling asleep alone in the bed we shared, reaching across the empty space for a body that wasn't there. I showered for 45 minutes. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw and red, until the water ran cold and then cold, until I couldn't feel anything except the sting of soap in the places where I had rubbed hard. I washed my my hair 3 times. I stood under the spray and I tried to convince myself that water could wash away betrayal, that the evidence could be rinsed down the drain with everything else. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel and shaking despite the steam, Marcus was standing in the bathroom doorway. His hair was mussed from sleep. His eyes were soft with concern. He was wearing the old t-shirt I had been trying to throw away for years. The one with the hole in the collar and the faded logo of a band he'd loved in college. "Hey," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You're home late. Everything okay?" I looked at him. This man who had trusted me completely, who had loved me without reservation, who had warmed my towel and left me notes and asked for nothing, except that I come home at the end of the day. I looked at him and I felt the weight of what I had done settle onto my shoulders, like something physical, something I would carry forever. "Fine," I said, "just a long night. Go back to sleep." He didn't move. He stood in that doorway, blocking my exit, and for one terrible moment I thought he knew. I thought he could see it on my skin, in my eyes, in the way I couldn't quite meet his gaze. I thought he would ask me the question I couldn't answer, and I would have to tell him, and everything would shatter into pieces too small to ever reassemble. But he only smiled, that gentle smile I had once loved and then learned to resent, and he stepped aside to let me pass. "I'm glad you're home," he said. "I always sleep better when you're here." I walked past him without touching him. I climbed into our bed and I lay on my side of the mattress, as far from him as possible without actually leaving the bed, and I stared at the wall until the light began to change, and the birds started singing their terrible morning songs. The days that followed were a study in compartmentalization. I woke up next to Marcus and I made him breakfast and I kissed him goodbye and I went to work, and I met Daniel for coffee and I came home and I made dinner and I watched television, and I lay in the dark and I tried to forget the taste of someone else's mouth. Daniel called it an adventure. He called it exploration, discovery, the natural progression of two people who shared a connection too powerful to ignore. He called it many things, all of them designed to make me feel better about what we were doing. None of them worked. I continued seeing him. That's the part I still can't explain. The part that makes me the villain of this story rather than its victim. I continued meeting him in coffee shops and restaurants and hotel rooms and his apartment. Always his apartment, never mine. I continued lying to Marcus with increasing ease, building elaborate fictions about work commitments and friend obligations, and personal time I desperately needed. Marcus never questioned any of it. He trusted me with the absolute trust of someone who cannot imagine betrayal. He asked about my day and listened to my answers. He made dinner and warmed my towel and left his notes on the bathroom mirror. He loved me with a consistency that should have been my anchor but instead became my torment. 3 weeks after that first night, Daniel told me he loved me. We were lying in his bed, the city glittering beyond the windows, and he turned to me with this expression of manufactured sincerity and he said the words I had been dreading and craving in equal measure. "I love you," he said. "I think I've loved you since that first conversation at the coffee shop." I didn't say it back. I couldn't, because even then, even in the middle of my betrayal, I knew that love wasn't what this was. This was escape. This was rebellion. This was the desperate grasping of someone who had confused comfort with confinement, and was now destroying the only good thing in her life in pursuit of something she couldn't even name. But I kept seeing him. I kept lying. I kept coming home to Marcus and pretending that everything was fine, that I was fine, that we were fine, that our life together was still the thing we had both chosen. The night it ended, the night everything truly ended, began like all the others. I told Marcus I was working late. I kissed him goodbye with lips that had touched another man's skin just hours before. I walked out of our apartment and into the warm evening air and I didn't look back. Daniel was waiting for me at a restaurant in the city, some place he'd chosen because it was expensive and impressive, and exactly the kind of establishment Marcus could never afford. We drank wine and ate food I don't remember and talked about things that didn't matter. I watched his hands move as he spoke and I tried to feel something other than the growing coldness in my chest. After dinner, we walked through the city streets. The night was warm and soft, the kind of evening that makes you believe in possibility, in second chances, in the fundamental goodness of the world. Daniel held my hand and talked about the future, about places we could travel, about a life we could build together. I listened and nodded and felt nothing at all. When he kissed me, standing on a bridge with the city lights reflected in the water below, I kissed him back, and then I stopped. "I can't do this anymore," I said. The words came out before I had consciously decided to speak them. They simply appeared in the air between us, solid and irrevocable, and I watched Daniel's face shift through a series of expressions I couldn't quite read. "What do you mean?" he asked this. I gestured vaguely at the space between us, at the city around us, at the whole elaborate construction of our affair. "I can't. I have to go home." He tried to argue. He tried to convince me that what we had was real, that I was just scared, that leaving Marcus was the right thing to do, the brave thing, the honest thing. He used all the right words and all the right orders, and I listened to them, like they were coming from very far away. "I have to go home," I said again. And I walked away from him, from the bridge, from the glittering city and the warm night and the whole complicated mess I had created. I walked until I found a cab, and I gave the driver my address, and I sat in the back seat, and I tried to figure out what I was going to say. The apartment was dark when I got there. That was the first unusual thing. Marcus always left a light on when I was working late, a small beacon to guide me home. But tonight, the windows were black, the kitchen dark, the whole space silent in a way that felt wrong. I let myself in and called his name. No answer. I walked through the apartment, turning on lights as I went, calling his name with increasing urgency. The bedroom was empty, the bed made with the precise corners he always insisted on. The bathroom was dark, his toothbrush in its holder, his towel hanging neatly on the rack. The living room was empty, the television off, the books on the shelves exactly where they always were. He wasn't there. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. I sat on the edge of our bed and I tried to think. He had plans with friends sometimes. He went to see his mother on Tuesday evenings. There were 100 innocent explanations for his absence. 1,000 reasons why he might not be home at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. But I knew, even before the phone rang, even before I saw his mother's name on the caller ID, even before I answered and heard her voice cracking with tears, I knew. "There's been an accident," she said. "You need to come to the hospital now." I don't remember the cab ride. I don't remember walking into the hospital. I don't remember finding his mother in the waiting room, her face swollen with crying, his father standing beside her with the stunned expression of someone who has received news that hasn't yet become real. I remember the doctor, a young woman with tired eyes and a gentle voice, the kind of voice people use when they have to deliver terrible news on a regular basis. She sat down across from me and she took my hands in hers and she said words that I heard, but couldn't understand. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." He was gone before they brought him in. A driver ran a red light. There was nothing anyone could do. I remember the sound I made. It wasn't a scream or a cry or anything recognizable as human expression. It was something else entirely. Something that came from a place so deep inside me that I didn't know it existed until that moment. It was the sound of a world ending. They told me the details later, in fragments that I assembled into a coherent narrative over the following weeks. Marcus had been driving home from his mother's house. He had taken the route he always took, the familiar streets he had driven thousands of times. A drunk driver had run a red light. He had hit Marcus's car on the driver's side. Marcus had died instantly, or so they said, as if that was supposed to be a comfort. I sat in that hospital for hours, surrounded by his family, accepting condolences for a loss I had helped create. I held his mother while she cried, and I promised her that I would be okay, that we would all be okay, that Marcus would want us to be strong. I said all the right things in all the right orders, and I felt nothing except the cold, certain knowledge that I had killed him, not the drunk driver, not the red light, not the cruel random chance of a universe that doesn't care who lives and who dies, me. I had killed him with my lies and my betrayal and my selfish conviction that I deserved something more than the love of a good man, because if I hadn't been with Daniel that night, I would have been home. I would have been there when Marcus returned from his mother's house. I would have been waiting with the lights on and dinner ready, and the truth finally ready to be spoken. I would have told him everything, and he would have been hurt, and maybe he would have left me, and maybe we would have worked through it, and maybe 1,000 other possibilities would have unfolded, but he would have been alive. He would have been alive and breathing and standing in our kitchen, while I destroyed him with my honesty, and that would have been infinitely better than this. The funeral was 3 days later. I stood in black clothes that felt like a costume, and I accepted hugs from people I didn't know, and I listened to eulogies that described a man I had somehow forgotten I loved. They talked about his kindness, his patience, his unwavering commitment to the people he loved. They talked about how he had always wanted to make the world a better place, how he had volunteered at the local food bank, how he had taken care of his aging mother, how he had loved me with a devotion that everyone could see. I stood at the edge of his grave and I watched them lower his coffin into the ground, and I felt the weight of what I had done pressing down on me like the earth itself. I wanted to throw myself into that hole. I wanted to scream the truth to everyone assembled there. I wanted to tell them that I was the one who had killed him, that my betrayal had set in motion the chain of events that ended with his body in that box, that I didn't deserve to stand among them and pretend to grieve. But I said nothing. I accepted their condolences. I nodded when they told me to be strong. I let them believe that I was just a young widow tragically deprived of the man I loved, when the truth was so much worse. The weeks that followed were a blur of arrangements and paperwork, and the mechanical business of death. I emptied his closet. I sorted through his belongings. I found the notes he had left me over the years, a collection of small kindnesses that I had never properly appreciated. They were everywhere, in books, in drawers, tucked into the pockets of coats I rarely wore, a paper trail of love that I had been too blind to see. I found one in the pocket of his favorite jacket, the one I had given him for our first anniversary. It was dated the day he died. I hope you had a good day at work. I made your favorite for dinner. There's wine in the fridge. I love you more than I know how to say. I sat on our bedroom floor and I held that note and I cried until there was nothing left inside me. I cried for Marcus and for the life we could have had and for the person I had been before. I became someone capable of betrayal. I cried for the future that would never happen and the past I had poisoned, and the present that stretched out before me like an endless desert of regret. His mother came to visit sometimes. She would sit in our kitchen and drink tea and talk about Marcus as a child, as a teenager, as the man he had become. She showed me photographs I had never seen and told me stories I had never heard, and slowly, painfully, I began to remember why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. He had been kind, not in the performative way of someone who wants to be seen as kind, but in the quiet, consistent way of someone who simply cannot be otherwise. He had held doors for strangers and tipped generously and stopped to help people whose cars had broken down. He had remembered the names of baristas and the birthdays of co-workers and the small details that made people feel seen. He had loved me without reservation or condition. He had accepted my moods and my silences and my growing distance without complaint. He had trusted me completely, and I had repaid that trust with betrayal. 6 weeks after the funeral, I found out I was pregnant. I stood in the bathroom of our apartment, the apartment that was now mine alone, and I stared at the plastic stick in my hand and I tried to calculate the dates. It was possible that the baby was Marcus's. It was also possible that it was Daniel's. The timing was close enough that I couldn't be sure, might never be sure. Would spend the rest of my life not knowing whether the child growing inside me was the last gift from the man I had betrayed or the permanent reminder of the man I had betrayed him with. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and I laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the laughter of someone who has reached the absolute limit of what they can bear, who has discovered that the universe has a sense of humor after all, and that the joke is always on them. I thought about my options. I thought about all the ways I could make this go away, could erase the evidence of my infidelity, could start fresh somewhere else with no one the wiser. I thought about it for a long time, sitting on that cold bathroom floor with the evidence of my predicament clutched in my hand. And then I thought about Marcus. I thought about how he had wanted children, had talked about them with the quiet hope of someone who believes in the future. I thought about how he would have been a good father, the best father, how he would have warmed towels for our children and left them notes, and loved them with the same steady devotion he had shown me. I thought about how I had taken that from him, how I had taken everything from him. I kept the baby. The pregnancy was difficult, as if my body knew that this child was conceived in betrayal and was determined to make me pay for it. I was sick constantly. I couldn't keep food down. I lost weight instead of gaining it. I spent hours in doctors' offices, undergoing tests and receiving warnings and nodding along to advice I couldn't follow. His mother helped. She came over twice a week with groceries and homemade soup and the kind of practical support that asked for nothing in return. She never asked about the pregnancy, about how I was feeling, about whether I was keeping the baby. She simply showed up and cooked and cleaned and sat with me in the heavy silence of our shared grief. I never told her about Daniel. I never told anyone. The secret sat inside me like a tumor, growing larger with each passing day, pressing against my organs and my memories and my ability to imagine any kind of future. The baby was born on a Tuesday, the same day of the week Marcus had died. It was a girl, small and perfect and screaming with the kind of healthy outrage that made the nurses laugh. They placed her on my chest and I looked at her tiny face and I tried to see Marcus there, tried to find some evidence that this child was his, that some part of him had survived. I couldn't tell. She had his coloring, maybe the same dark hair and pale skin, but she had my nose, my chin, features that could have come from anywhere. She was a blank slate, a question mark, a living embodiment of the uncertainty that would define the rest of my life. I named her Elena. It was his grandmother's name, a name he had mentioned once in passing, a small tribute to the man who would never know her. The first year was survival, pure, mechanical, one foot in front of the other survival. I learned to function on no sleep. I learned to interpret her cries and meet her needs and pretend that I was okay when I was anything but. I went through the motions of motherhood while carrying the weight of my secret like an extra child I could never put down. I thought about Daniel sometimes. I wondered if he had tried to find me, if he had moved on, if he thought about that night on the bridge and what might have been. I never contacted him. I never told him about the baby. As far as he knew, I was just a woman who had walked away, a brief chapter in his life that had closed without resolution. Some nights, when Elena was sleeping and the apartment was quiet, I would sit in the dark and I would talk to Marcus. I would tell him about my day, about Elena's milestones, about the small moments of joy that punctured the general gray of my existence. I would apologize over and over for what I had done. I would ask for forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve. I would promise to be better, to do better, to raise our daughter in a way that would make him proud. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe that he could hear me, but I talked to him anyway because the silence was unbearable, and because some part of me needed to believe that somewhere, somehow, he knew how sorry I was. Elena grew. She learned to crawl, to walk, to talk. She had his laugh, a surprised sound that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. She had his habit of tilting her head when she was thinking, of furrowing her brow when she was concentrating. She had pieces of him scattered through her like clues to a mystery I would never solve. I told her about him. I showed her photographs and told her stories and made sure she knew that her father had been a good man, a kind man, a man who would have loved her more than anything in the world. I didn't tell her how he died. I didn't tell her about the drunk driver or the red light or the hospital waiting room. I told her that he had been taken too soon, that he was watching over her from somewhere better, that he loved her still. I didn't tell her about Daniel. I didn't tell her that she might not be his daughter at all. I buried that possibility so deep inside myself that sometimes I almost believed it didn't exist. When Elena was 3, I met someone. His name was Tom, and he was a teacher at the preschool Elena attended. He was kind and patient, and he looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. We started with coffee, then dinner, then the slow, careful dance of to people who have been hurt before and are afraid of being hurt again. I told him about Marcus. I told him about the accident, about the grief, about the years of survival that had followed. I told him about Elena and how she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I told him everything except the one thing that mattered most. He proposed on the 2nd anniversary of our first date. We were having dinner at a restaurant overlooking the river, the same restaurant where we had shared our first real conversation. He got down on one knee and he asked me to marry him, and I said yes because I loved him, and because I wanted to believe that I deserved happiness, and because the alternative was admitting that I would spend the rest of my life paying for one night. We got married 6 months later. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Elena was the flower girl, scattering petals with the intense concentration of a child taking her responsibilities seriously. Tom's parents cried. My mother cried. Everyone cried except me, because I had used up all my tears years ago and hadn't found new ones since. I thought about Marcus that day. I thought about our wedding, small and simple and full of hope. I thought about how he had looked at me when I walked down the aisle, like I was the answer to every question he had ever asked. I thought about how I had looked back at him, believing that I was lucky, that I was loved, that I had found something rare and precious. I thought about how I had thrown it all away. Tom was good to me. He was good to Elena. He was patient and understanding, and he never pushed when I withdrew into myself. When the grief resurfaced, when I spent hours staring at nothing and remembering everything, he gave me space when I needed it and presence when I couldn't be alone. He loved me in a way that asked for nothing except that I let him. And I did let him. I let him love me, and I loved him back, as much as I was capable of loving anyone after what I had done. I built a life with him. I made a home. I tried to be the person that Marcus had believed I was. The person I might have been if I hadn't made the choices that led me to that night. Elena called him Dad. It happened gradually, without discussion or decision. One day she was calling him Tom, and the next she was calling him Dad. And he responded with a kind of natural acceptance that made me love him even more. I never corrected her. I never reminded her that she had another father, a real father, a man who would have given anything to watch her grow up. I let her have this simple happiness, this uncomplicated love. But I never stopped thinking about Marcus. I never stopped visiting his grave, sitting on the grass beside his headstone, talking to him about Elena and Tom and the life I had built on the ruins of the life I had destroyed. I never stopped apologizing, never stopped explaining, never stopped hoping that somehow, somewhere, he could hear me and understand. On Elena's 10th birthday, I found a letter in the mail. It was addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize, postmarked from a city across the country. I opened it with shaking hands, knowing somehow that this was the moment I had been dreading for a decade. It was from Daniel. He wrote that he had thought about me often over the years. He wrote that he had never forgotten that night on the bridge, the way I had walked away, the unfinished business that had haunted him ever since. He wrote that he had done some research, that he had learned about Marcus's death, that he had done the math and realized that the timing meant the child I was carrying that night could have been his. He wrote that he wanted to know. He wrote that he deserved to know. He wrote that if Elena was his daughter, he had a right to be part of her life. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer and closed the drawer, and tried to forget that it existed, but I couldn't forget. The letter sat in that drawer like a ticking bomb, waiting to explode. I thought about it constantly. I dreamed about it. I woke in the middle of the night with my heart pounding and the certain knowledge that my past was finally catching up with me. I didn't tell Tom. I didn't tell anyone. I carried the secret alone, the way I had carried everything else, because telling someone would make it real in a way I couldn't handle. Daniel wrote again and again, each letter more insistent than the last, each one making demands I couldn't meet and asking questions I couldn't answer. He threatened to show up at my door. He threatened to hire a lawyer. He threatened to take matters into his own hands if I wouldn't cooperate. I wrote back finally. I told him that Elena was Marcus's daughter, that the timing was clear, that there was no possibility she was his. I lied with the same ease I had once lied to Marcus, constructing a fiction designed to protect the life I had built. I don't know if he believed me. I never heard from him again, but the letters left their mark. They opened a door I had tried to keep closed, released memories I had tried to keep buried. I started thinking about that night again, about the bridge and the city lights and the way I had walked away. I started thinking about Marcus, about the last hours of his life, about how he had spent them alone while I was in another man's arms. The guilt came back. It had never really left, of course, but it had faded to something manageable, something I could carry without collapsing under its weight. Now it returned in full force, pressing down on me with the same intensity I had felt in that hospital waiting room, in that funeral home at the edge of that open grave. I started having panic attacks. I would be doing something ordinary. Mary, making dinner or helping Elena with homework or watching television with Tom. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. My heart would race. My hands would shake. I would have to leave the room, find a quiet corner, wait for the feeling to pass. Tom noticed. Of course he noticed. He asked what was wrong, if he could help, if I needed to talk to someone. I told him I was fine. I told him it was stress, work pressure, the normal challenges of middle age. I lied to him the way I had lied to everyone because the truth was too terrible to speak aloud. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, the anniversary of Marcus's death. I had taken the day off work as I always did. I had visited his grave as I always did. I had spent the afternoon alone, thinking about him, talking to him, apologizing to him. I had come home exhausted and empty and ready to collapse into bed. But Elena was waiting for me. She was 13 now, old enough to ask questions, old enough to sense that something was wrong. She sat on my bed and she looked at me with Marcus's eyes and she asked me the question I had been dreading for years. Who was my real father? I tried to deflect. I tried to change the subject. I tried to tell her that Tom was her father, that he had raised her, that he loved her, that was what mattered. But she wouldn't let it go. She had found photographs, she said. She had done research. She knew that Tom wasn't her biological father, that there had been someone before him, someone who had died before she was born. She wanted to know who he was. She wanted to know what he was like. She wanted to know why I never talked about him. And so I told her. I told her about Marcus. I told her about how we met, how we fell in love, how we got married. I told her about his kindness and his patience and his unwavering devotion. I told her about the notes he left and the towels he warmed and the way he looked at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. I told her how he died. I told her about the drunk driver and the red light and the hospital waiting room. I told her about the funeral and the grief and the years of survival that followed. I didn't tell her about Daniel. I couldn't. That secret was mine alone, and I would carry it to my grave. She cried. I held her. We sat together in the dark and we mourned a man she had never known. A father who would have loved her more than anything. A life that could have been so different. After that night, something shifted between us. Elena started asking more questions, wanting more details, trying to piece together the puzzle of her origins. She visited his grave with me. She read the letters he had written me before we were married. She looked at photographs and listened to stories, and slowly, painfully, she fell in love with the father she would never know. And I watched her, and I loved her, and I hated myself for the secret I was keeping. Tom noticed the change. He asked what was going on, why Elena was suddenly so obsessed with a man she had never met. I tried to explain, tried to make him understand. But how could he understand when I wasn't telling him the whole truth? He started pulling away, not dramatically, not obviously, but in small ways that added up over time. He worked late more often. He spent weekends on projects that kept him out of the house. He stopped reaching for me in bed, stopped kissing me goodbye, stopped looking at me the way he used to. I knew what was happening. I knew I was losing him the same way I had lost Marcus through my own inability to be honest, my own failure to trust the people who loved me. But I couldn't stop it. I couldn't break the pattern. I was trapped in the consequences of choices I had made years ago, and there was no way out. Elena graduated high school. She went to college, the same one Marcus had attended, because she wanted to feel connected to him somehow. She studied hard and made friends and built a life for herself. That had nothing to do with my secrets or my guilt. Tom and I divorced when she was 19. It was quiet and civilized and utterly devoid of passion. He told me he loved me but couldn't live with my ghosts. I told him I understood and wished him well. We divided our possessions and sold our house and went our separate ways, without ever really saying goodbye. I live alone now, in a small apartment in the same city where I once lived with Marcus, where I once betrayed him, where I once stood on a bridge and walked away from one man to go home to another. The city has changed over the years, but the memories haven't. They're etched into the streets and buildings and the particular quality of the light. At certain times of day, I visit Marcus's grave every Tuesday. I bring flowers in the summer, a blanket in the winter, words that I hope somehow reach him. I tell him about Elena, about her accomplishments and her struggles and the woman she's becoming. I tell him about Tom, about the divorce, about the loneliness that has become my constant companion. I tell him I am sorry, over and over, as if repetition could somehow make up for what I did. The night I let Daniel kiss me, I didn't just cheat. I didn't just break a vow or cross a line or make a mistake. I killed the only man who truly loved me, not with my hands, not with a weapon, not with any action that would show up in a police report or court of law, but with my choices, with my lies, with my selfish conviction that I deserved something more than the steady, patient love of a good man. I killed him as surely as if I had been driving the car that hit him. I killed him by not being where I should have been, by not being the person I should have been, by not recognizing the value of what I had until it was too late. And now I live with that knowledge every single day. I wake with it in the morning and I carry it through my hours and I fall asleep with it at night. It is the weight I cannot put down, the secret I cannot share, the one that will never heal. Elena comes to visit sometimes. She's in her 20s now, a woman with her own life and her own struggles and her own secrets. She looks like Marcus more every year, the same eyes, the same smile, the same way of tilting her head when she's thinking. I see him in her constantly, a ghost made flesh, a reminder of everything I lost and everything I destroyed. She doesn't know about Daniel. She doesn't know that she might not be Marcus's daughter, that her existence might be the product of my betrayal rather than my love. I will take that secret to my grave because telling her would destroy her, and I have destroyed enough. Sometimes, late at night, I let myself imagine what might have been. I imagine coming home that night instead of going to Daniel's apartment. I imagine being there when Marcus returned from his mother's house, sitting him down, telling him the truth. I imagine his hurt, his anger, his confusion. I imagine us working through it, or not working through it, but either way, I imagine him alive. I imagine him meeting Elena, holding her for the first time, watching her take her first steps, speak her first words, become the person she is today. I imagine him at her graduation, her wedding, the birth of her own children. I imagine him old and gray and still looking at me with love even after everything. But that's not what happened. What happened is that I made a choice, and that choice had consequences. And those consequences rippled outward to touch everyone I love. What happened is that I killed the only man who truly loved me, and I have spent the rest of my life paying for it. Tonight is Tuesday. I will visit his grave tomorrow, as I always do. I will bring flowers and I will talk to him and I will apologize again, knowing that it changes nothing, that he can't hear me, that the dead don't care about the regrets of the living. But I will go anyway because it's the only thing I can do. It's the only penance I have. It's the only way I know to keep him alive, to keep remembering, to keep acknowledging the weight of what I did. The night I let him kiss me, I didn't just cheat. I killed the only man who truly loved me, and I will carry that truth with me until the day I die. I am 73 years old now. I have outlived Marcus by more than 4 decades, a fact that seems like the cruelest joke. He should be here, growing old beside me, sharing the weight of these years. Instead, I carry them alone, weighted by memories that grow no lighter with time. Elena has children of her own. 2 boys, both with Marcus's eyes, both with his laugh. She named the older one Marcus, and when I hold him, when I look into his small face, I see his grandfather looking back at me. It is a gift I don't deserve and a torment I can't escape. I have never told her the truth. I have never told anyone. The secret sits inside me like a stone, smooth and heavy and permanent. Some days I think about writing it down, putting it on paper, releasing it into the world so that I don't have to carry it alone anymore. But I never do. Some secrets are meant to be carried to the grave. My health is failing. The doctors use words I don't want to hear and make recommendations I don't intend to follow. I have lived long enough, paid enough, suffered enough. I am ready for whatever comes next, even if what comes next is nothing at all. But before I go, there is one thing I need to do. I write a letter to Elena. I tell her everything. I tell her about Daniel, about the affair, about the night Marcus died. I tell her that I don't know who her father is, that it could be either of them, that I have spent her whole life not knowing and not telling. I tell her that I am sorry, that I have always been sorry. That sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have. I seal the letter and I leave it on my bedside table with instructions that it be given to her after I'm gone, and then I wait. The end comes on a Tuesday, the same day of the week Marcus died. Elena is there holding my hand, her eyes filled filled with tears. She doesn't know about the letter. She doesn't know what I've done. She only knows that her mother is dying and she is sad and she loves me. I tried to tell her. I try to find the words, to explain, to make her understand. But the words won't come. They're trapped inside me, along with everything else. So I squeeze her hand and I smile and I let her believe that I am at peace, that I have no regrets, that I am ready to go. And then I close my eyes and I let go, and I hope that wherever I'm going, Marcus will be there, waiting for me, ready to hear the apology I've been practicing for 50 years.